Hello friends! Today I'm going to be talking about the Supernatural finale, which aired on November 19th, 2020. 1 year later, how do I feel about it? I feel differently than I did before, not entirely, but subtle things. I haven't rewatched it since then, but I've just sat with it for a year, let my feelings mull over, and I have actually gone back and watched the beginning of the show again, and I've made it up to about season 6, season 7 at this point. I don't think that I can say that I actively liked the finale. When I first watched it, I said, oh yeah, no, I liked it. Um, but it wasn't just that I didn't love it. I don't know that I liked it. I don't seem to hate it with the same vitriol that a very large portion of the fan base did, but it was definitely disappointing to me and has become more disappointing the longer I let it sit in my brain. One thing for me is that I think I didn't expect a lot from it, and so I didn't necessarily get my hopes up. That doesn't mean it wasn't disappointing, and that doesn't mean I didn't want a lot of the same things that a good portion of the fans wanted, but I just wasn't crushed the way that they were. As usual, I'm going to put my timestamps down below in the description so that you can cycle through the video. So from a narrative standpoint, I kind of get why they made the choices that they did with the finale, especially recognizing that Supernatural has so many different writers and directors and producers. Everybody has their own story, everybody has their own spin, and it just so happened that, like Castiel's last episode, Despair, that was written and directed by two of my favorite writers and directors, whereas the finale and the episode right before the finale weren't really. So even just the style was something that I wasn't as thrilled with. Before I watched the finale back a year ago, I made my predictions about what I thought was going to happen. So I thought that likely Sam would end up married and out of the hunting life. I was hoping that he would end up with Eileen, since they spent a good portion of season 15 kind of building that up. And I thought that Dean would likely die, just because I didn't think that the storytellers knew exactly what they wanted to do with him, and they hadn't introduced like a romantic interest for him. So it just seemed to me that they would most likely kill him off. Not saying that that's what I wanted, but saying that that's what I thought was most likely to happen based on the past. And then my other hope was that Castiel would come back, but given his big goodbye scene in episode 18, I thought he's likely not going to come back. Plus the whole COVID situation, I was sort of monitoring where Misha was at the time, and sounds creepy when I say it that way, but it wasn't really. It was a whole online thing. People were wondering who was going back to Canada and who wasn't. So I didn't think that he was going to be in the last episode, so I was kind of mentally prepared for that, but I did sincerely hope that Cass would be a bigger part of it than he ended up being. I was really hoping that, like, if I could have everything I wanted, I would want a big happily ever after for everyone, and for them to come together with their big found family and all of that, just live a great life. And I really hoped that they would include at least some of the characters, which they ended up not really doing. They mentioned Jack, they mentioned Cass, but it would have been nice to see like some phone calls or something to that effect, especially since so many of the characters just Thanos snapped, at the end of episode 18 and with 19. In my last video, I stated that I thought that the writers gave us a gift in a way where they threw things back to the fans, and that was just because I didn't really trust them with everything, sort of like J.K. Rowling and the Marauders. I have so much built up in my mind that I don't know that I would trust her to go and deliver the story that I would want, or that seems like most of Tumblr wants, but I just don't. I would just rather have people deal with it that would give me happiness. So I just didn't trust the writers in this case. That's my personal opinion. As evidence, let's just say thank God, or thank Jack in this case, that we didn't get that Jimmy Novak scene, which some of you will know what I'm talking about, but I think that would have really just crushed me. What I'm still confused about is why Sam didn't end up with Eileen. I mean, from like a shipping perspective, obviously, and because I like Eileen, but from a narrative standpoint too. Like, they spent a lot of time setting that up when she was Thanos snapped, like, Sam was upset, you know? So the fact that we just didn't hear about her again, didn't hear about the rest of the people that disappeared, like, they really dropped the ball on that, in my opinion. So, on to Dean. Dean. I don't actually hate the way that he died or his death scene. I spoke about that in my last video a little bit. I think that if they were going to kill him, it makes sense that they did it in a way where he would be able to talk and he wouldn't be able to like recover from it, you know? And apparently Jensen also fought for Dean to be able to die standing up, which I get that too. I think that makes sense in this case. Have a little bit of dignity, you know? And I think that they did a good job with the goodbye, the two of them. It broke my heart in a good way. But did they have to kill Dean? In my opinion, my personal opinion, I didn't know what else the writers would do with him, since if monsters exist, Sam and Dean are going to fight them. So one way they could have dealt with that is that Chuck could have just, or Jack, I guess, Jack could have done away with monsters when he became God. And so then there would be like a peace on earth situation, because I don't see any way that Dean would just stop fighting monsters. Also, we were given the episode with Chuck and Becky, which is season 15, episode 4, where Becky says, hey, if you're gonna just kill off one brother, that leaves us with no hope. That makes your fans sad. Nobody wants that. Just because you, as the creator, think that that would be really dramatic and a cool way to do things, doesn't necessarily mean that it's what's right. And so I think it's interesting that the show said that, like they were aware of it, and then they went and did it anyway, knowing what the result would be. Honestly, to me, during that whole last episode, even though I made my predictions ahead of time, when I went into that episode, I thought, oh, Dean's gonna die. Like, from that pie festival thing, I don't know what exactly it was in that scene that made me feel this way, but Sam is asking Dean about, like, hey, how do we move on? And I miss these people and all of that. And Dean just sort of glosses over it and says, like, well, if we don't keep living, what would the sacrifice be for? But he does the Dean repressed emotions thing where he's just sort of like, yeah, I'm not going to think about that right now. And something in that scene, my brain just went, oh, no, Dean's going to die. Okay. So I was already mentally preparing myself. So here's where my opinions on the finale have changed a little bit since sitting with it. Before I thought, you know, every time Cass dies, Dean gets depressed, and we've seen before that he's always ready to like sacrifice himself and be the one to die, and he just generally doesn't have a very high self-worth in that regard if other people are able to survive. We've seen that multiple times. And especially in instances where Cass is gone, Dean gets depressed, he gets downright suicidal. We saw the one situation where he died and Death was like, okay, not your time. And Dean's like, but what if it were? So that's not healthy. That's not a good way to live. So I thought while watching the finale, like, oh, okay, well, we've seen this before with Dean, so it makes sense. But what I failed to consider is that I don't have those types of mental health problems. So I wasn't thinking about the only peace you'll have is in death, like what that message would do to people, especially those who have been using the show as a source of hope and a source of overcoming obstacles and carry on, and always keep fighting, which he tells Sam to do, but then for himself, he just goes. And it's like, oh, he's a warrior, like the sort of Valhalla mentality of he died, but he died doing what he loved. He died in battle, so he's good. That's what he wanted. But why do these stories keep having to end in tragedy? Like, don't we have enough in real life of people dying, of people not making it, that we can just be given like something good in a story, something pleasant? Dean had a whole lot of life that he didn't get to live. I would have been much happier with the ending that we received in Venom 2, i.e. the chilling on the beach bit. I loved that. And again, one way they could have done that is like the monsters being gotten rid of after Chuck was gone. So Dean could have had peace on Earth. And I know some people do believe that, like, oh, well, in death you'll have peace and it will be nice. But, like, why can't he have peace while he's alive? Plus, I wasn't really thrilled with the monsters that they had in that last episode. I don't know what it was about them. They just didn't do it for me. That's an aside. But there you go. As for Sam, I was pretty much okay with the way that his ending was, other than not having Eileen. I mean, he did seem pretty sad, so that's to be expected, I guess. I'm now going to mention, but not talk about, Sam's wig. Moving on. His whole life montage was partially a good idea, but I just feel like it wasn't executed well. Just like with a lot of the other things in the finale, we had some nice ideas, but not thrilling results. So, time to talk about Cass. I would have loved to see the ending that we got in Schitt's Creek, just saying found family and all. But, unfortunately, obviously, we weren't going to get that. I feel like with the ending that we got in 15-18, it just really didn't make sense for them to bring him back, even though I wanted that with every fiber of my being the whole time I watched the finale. But I'm glad that they at least mentioned that he's no longer in Super Mega Hell. And now it's time to talk about LGBTQ things. So this gets a little bit ranty, so if you want to skip to this timestamp, it's up to you. But feel free to stay. Despite the fact that the romantic implications behind Cass's confession continue to be discredited and kind of disregarded by certain cast members, we know what Cass meant. Or at least the Spanish translation does. But seriously, what is the one thing I want that I can't have? Like, what else would that mean? They were already friends. Good friends, like brotherly friends. As soon as those words came out of his mouth, I cannot describe for you the feeling that passed through my body. I felt like I was on the verge of an anxiety attack, but also like I was having an out-of-body experience, like going to some other plane of existence. I was just like, is this happening? Is this actually happening? Is what I'm hearing what's going on? If you know, you know. It was a common feeling, apparently. Anyway, I don't see his sacrifice and that whole sequence as inherently a bury your gays moment, just like how Misha has kind of talked about it. But I feel like when you pair it with Dean's death and then you just don't talk about it ever again, I feel like that tips it over into that category. They just don't deal with it. And I know that there's the argument that, oh, this isn't the most important thing to be worrying about, like with Chuck and with the end of the series. But it feels very convenient that it happened at a time where now they can just say, oh, no, we have other better things to talk about. They left so much open for us to have to figure out on our own, which can sometimes be good. But, I mean, we don't know how Dean felt about it. We don't know what happened when they reunited. We don't know, Like, Dean didn't even really get very many lines in the whole scene, and apparently a chunk of footage was cut out. The show could have embraced the greatest slow burn in history, but they chose not to. And we all know this would not be up for debate if Cass were still in his female vessel that we saw a few seasons back. Like, you wouldn't even have to change the lines. It would just be like a common thing. People would just understand it to be inherently so. But then, Cass probably would have been killed off for good a long time ago if that were the case. You probably thought that that was the tangent. Well, it was not. Now, from Arrow Aceland, I don't actually have a problem with Cass's confession being romantic without being sexual or even being alterous. But I do love a good romance. That being said, queer platonic relationships should not be discounted. I love them. I think that they should be valued and are valid. So the issue here is, again, not really with Cass, but with Dean. So we can go on and on about how Cass's feelings can't be understandable to humans and are of a heavenly nature. But Dean, on the other hand, is like the most human to ever human, and it's well established that he's not asexual, you know? So the Arrow Ace spectrum debate that can apply to Cass, and I think it should, that's my personal headcanon, it doesn't apply to Dean. And so that's where we end up with the problem. If you've made it to this point, I gave you a fair warning and you know it. The show was so scared to make Dean explicitly bisexual, even though they make jokes about it and have kind of subtle nods to it from, I think, season 1. And the more bi you are, the more evidence you see of this. Just because they're afraid of the backlash, they're afraid of ruining this image that we have of him, that's this gruff, manly dude. But that, my friends, is an example of bi erasure and gay stereotyping, actually. People like Dean, in this sense, do exist. People who grew up in the Bible Belt with an overbearing father, who live in a heteronormative world, who like multiple genders, but maybe gravitate towards one either because of society or because that one gender really is their preference, and both is fine, you know? But bi people exist in real life. They do, trust me. And being bi isn't inherently more promiscuous. It's not inherently less family friendly. You can show relationships that are queer relationships without even really needing a solid reason to. But in this particular case, the narrative supports it in multiple ways. It's also normal for people to not completely have their sexuality figured out till their 20s, their 30s, their 40s, you know? People all figure things out in different amounts of time. Not everybody knows from the time they're like 10, 11, 12 years old, you know? My point is that Dean can stay Dean. He can stay himself. He can be beefed up, 6'2", manly man, repressed emotion self, and still be bisexual. And it's fine. Now, is this a headcanon of mine and a result of me watching the show through my own personal lens and belief system with some confirmation bias going on here? Yes, all of that's true. However, there's evidence to support it. Even just the Dr. Sexy thing alone should be enough for people to say, something going on here. Think about if it had been Sam who had that situation. Like, Dean would have teased him mercilessly about it. It would have been like, hey Sam, you got something to tell us, huh? But with Dean, it's just sort of glossed over, like, oh, well, we know how Dean is. But that's the point. We know how Dean is. And I also want to make it clear that I'm not saying that every single character known to man falls somewhere on the LGBTQ plus spectrum. I know that some cis het straight people exist in the world. I just happen to think that Dean is not one of them. The show even plays the Dean-Cass relationship like a couple. They do that intentionally. They make jokes about it, where it's like a subtle subtext thing that's understood, but it's also supposed to be understood that it's not what's going on, so they're trying to play both sides at the same time. We have the, well, he was your boyfriend first, and the, the angel in the dirty trench coat that's in love with you. And when Rowena is trying to figure out what's going on between them in season 15, and Cass saying to Dean, like, you asked what about all this was real? Well, we are. We have the Destiel breakup scene that is played exactly like a couple breakup scene. We have all of those. They did it intentionally. This isn't one of those, oh, you're just insane for thinking that. Where did you even get that idea thing? So as mentioned, this got way derailed from the finale talk. Not super, I mean, it still is relevant, but I warned you multiple times, so there you go. I just needed to talk about it on video, apparently. So Misha is the MVP because he listens. Not that I think that people are necessarily owed that. Like, I don't know of any other show where the fans have such a direct communication going on with actors. So I understand that sometimes people think that they're entitled to that, and they're not actually. You can separate the work from the artist, but Supernatural's been different for a long time. It's with the fan conventions and Twitter and everything, there's a lot more of an open dialogue going on. So for those of you who watch the show for the show within the show, yeah, the finale left a lot to be desired. For casual viewers, I think that it was fine. Again, not great, but fine, not a huge deal. Why the target audience for the finale of a 15-year show would be casual viewers, I don't know, but I like full circle moments as much as the next person, but I just wish that there had been more growth shown instead of continuing to focus on the codependent relationship of the brothers to the very end and having death be the only thing that could break that codependency, and even then having Sam's happiness not really be there until he reunited with Dean in heaven, which is just like they can't exist without the other one, which has been a problem in the show forever. I think that they could have used some of the montage time that they put in there. If they took some of that out, they would have had time to focus on some of the other loose ends that were left. In conclusion, Eileen deserved better. Sam's hair deserved better. Miracle deserved better. Dean deserved better. Cass deserved to have his happiness fully realized instead of just spoken. Now there is happiness, there is joy in finally realizing your truth and being able to openly share that, especially with the people who you care the most about you. But Cass deserved to be told that he was loved, like, once, you know? It doesn't even matter what type. Like, you can have it platonic if you want. But he just deserved, instead of just like, hey, you're needed, or hey, you're family, or whatever, like, hey, you're loved. We love you. You know? Love as an action is important, but love as words is also important. It is. And you're not gonna wear it out by saying it more. That's not how love works. So there you go. Those are my thoughts on the finale a year later. I have found that I feel very similarly to it that I feel about Age of Ultron. But that's its own separate video there. That I'm not gonna unpack that right now. So thank you for watching. If you disagree with me, totally fine, I get it. These are all just my personal opinions that I'm sharing with the internet at large. So remember to like, comment down below, how did you feel, what did you think, and subscribe to my channel. See you next time.